All right. Hello, everybody. So I am Thomas Melching, president of Biohackers San Francisco, which is one of the largest communities of health and wellness enthusiasts and medical professionals in the Bay Area. Usually we do in-person events. So we hold monthly socials, biohacking related talks. For people not familiar with what that really means, it's topics like sleep science, nootropics, nutrition, meditation science, much more. But today we're going to do something a little bit different. We have Jonah Larkin with us, so we're going to do a virtual interview with him. So Jonah is someone I've had the pleasure of spending some time with, and I can tell you he's the real deal when it comes to understanding the human body, what makes the human body work, overall wellness, lots of interesting tips and tricks in his head that we're going to try to get out today. So I will quickly read Jonah's bio just so you have a better idea of who he is. So Jonah's been practicing functional medicine professionally since 2012. He received his license in acupuncture and Chinese medicine. Since then, he's worked with hundreds of clients to get to the root of whatever issue is holding them back from achieving vitality. He interned with Dr. Daniel Kalish. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. I don't want to screw it up too badly.
Kalish. That's all good.
Kalish. Okay. Well, I'd give him my best shot.
He'll forgive you.
Okay. I appreciate it in advance, Daniel. So he is, Dr. Daniel Kalish is one of the current luminaries of functional medicine. So besides the work Jonah does with his personal clients, he is also the co-founder of How Humans Work, an organization consulting business where they have created the first comprehensive holistic health assessment based on ancestral health, biochemistry, and evolutionary biology. So far, he has brought this work into the corporate settings and has worked with leaders at companies like Wells Fargo, Yelp, Cisco, and more. Jonah, thank you very much for being here. Glad we have a chance to talk.
Thanks for the kind intro, Thomas, and It's always a pleasure to hang out with you, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate it. So before we get to anything too technical and you start throwing numbers or terms or acronyms at people too quickly, I want to take a second to learn a little bit more about your background, kind of what brought you here, and not to layer on too many questions at once. But one thing I did read on your website that I'm dying to know more about is that you spent 12 hours a day meditating for 6 weeks straight.
Yeah.
I have to know a little bit more about what brought you into that, whatever you can share about that experience. I think people would be interested.
A lot of pain, man. A lot of pain. Yeah, it's a good question. And to be completely honest, I don't exactly know why I did such a thing, but there's a part of me that's an extremist. And when I was about 8 or 9 years old, I saw my dad sitting on the couch meditating. And I was really curious as to what that was, like how you could just shut your eyes and sit there quietly and that something was happening. And that got me really fascinated. When I was 21, I went to Thailand and I was traveling around there, backpacking, and I signed up for a 30-day meditation retreat, sight unseen. I just went for it. And it was a horrible experience, but an amazing experience at the same time. It was horrible because it was so hard. And throughout the years, I did some long-term retreats. And at one point, after I sold my company, this was in, I think, 2006 or 2007. I just sold my company and I was kind of burnt out and messed up in the head. And I just said, you know what? I need to go to a Vipassana retreat. So I went to a 6-week retreat.
Even though the previous experience had been such a painful one, you were like, this is the medicine that I need now. Okay.
Yeah. I was like committed to getting through it. And something changed for me doing it for that long. I got to the point where I stopped fighting trying to meditate. And I actually learned to meditate by giving up all concepts of what meditation is or should be. And that was a real change point in my practice.
Wow. Okay.
And I can't recommend it enough. I mean, going and doing a 30-day retreat is a truly life-changing experience. And doing a 6-week retreat, it's just like, it's kind of a bonus.
Really? So I want to pause for a second on the giving up expectations of what it should be. So you and I both live here in the Bay Area where technology is revered and everybody loves it. It's changing the world. As far as how technology has entered, we'll call it the meditation space, right? So apps, Calm, Headspace, Waking Up, the Sam Harris app that came out not that long ago. Kevin Rose came up with one called Oak. There's like no end, and the Muse devices, all those, there's no end to the intersection of now technology and this space. But, and although the guided meditations are phenomenal as like training wheel sessions and can even be your whole form of meditation, I guess, do you have any words of wisdom for people who are getting into it, or how they should go about looking at like, how do I use technology to achieve this? Like, what's the point of it all?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that there's a lot of press about mindfulness out there. Oh, you got to meditate, you got to do that, and ultimately, what I found out personally is that meditation is more about relaxation than anything else. Mm-hmm. So the relaxation is one part of it, and then there's the recognizing what's happening to yourself, and that's the other part of it. And so it's a complex circle, basically, because on one hand, you want to pay attention and understand what's happening here. And on the other hand, you want to use that to get into a space where you're open and relaxed and insight can flow in. And I think what happens with first-time meditators and new meditators, and it certainly happened with me, was that I thought I was supposed to be doing something right. And I literally spent probably 10 years trying to meditate the right way, trying to scan my body the right way, trying to watch my breath the right way. And I truly learned to meditate when I literally gave up trying to be a good meditator. And I just said, let me just sit here and see what happens. And when I was able to do that, that's when things really shifted for me. It's not to say I didn't receive any benefit before, but meditation is more about, to me, the process of really relaxing and opening, as opposed to following the breath and doing this and doing that. Okay. It's really just about paying attention to what's happening now. That's it.
And using kind of the breath and things as like a training point, or giving you someone a goal who's not used to not having goals might be helpful in the beginning, but
that's right. I mean, there are times in meditation where you want to develop that very fine focus, and watching the breath or body scanning is a good way to really hone in and focus the mind very sharply. But ultimately, you want to use that focus to open up and to start to receive information both from yourself and outside yourself.
Okay, awesome. Well, it seems like those are pretty transformational experiences for you to go through, especially doing that for so long. But
yeah. I mean, what I recommend to my clients is like, find a practice where you can settle down. Like, maybe it's walking on the beach. Maybe it's like staring into your pet's eyes. Anything that brings you into the present moment, where you can just be with what is just for a few minutes, is what I found to be really key.
Gotcha. Okay. I feel like this could be multiple conversations.
Yeah, we could talk about this.
I don't know if there's ever an end to this particular conversation.
Never.
But one more thing about your background there. So you said you sold your company back in 2006, 2007. Can you tell me a little bit more about that kind of?
Yeah, I've been an entrepreneur my whole life. I started by selling NFL football pencils to my classmates in, I think, 3rd or 4th grade.
Oh, wow.
So done lots of different stuff. Started an organic and hemp and recycled surf clothing company when I was just out of college. That failed spectacularly. My next company was actually I started a retail store, and that retail store grew into an online store. And my business partner and I were one of the first people to sell skateboards online.
Oh, cool.
Back in the day. And so we built that company into a small chain of brick and mortar retail stores. And then we had a pretty solid online business. I remember competing with Zappos. And it's funny because my business partner he a few months ago, he met the founder of Zappos. And, Zappos, of course, sold to was it Amazon for $1 billion or something like that. Wow. And we were competing at the time and just had no idea that venture capital was even available.
Oh wow!
So it was funny. I call it the "How I Lost $1 billion" story, even though I wasn't even close to getting there.
Could have been.
So anyway, we built that company into a multi-million-dollar company. Sold it all in at the end of 2005, beginning of 2006. And at that point, I took some time off, went to China, and my friend who was a doctor was in China at a hospital there. And I was just another gringo, basically. And they let me kind of have free reign in this hospital just because I was a white dude. And I cruised around and watched them do acupuncture and all this stuff. I got really inspired, and I decided to become an acupuncturist. And that was the origin story of that.
Oh, wow. I guess so. If you could clarify for people, because I want to make sure that everybody kind of understands. Before we get too in the weeds of it, can you just tell people what functional medicine is? Yeah. I guess kind of like like how it works, because I don't know if some people think that it means like Eastern medicine versus Western medicine, or what kind of preconceived most people would have. But
yeah. When I tell people I have an acupuncture license, they think I stick needles in people, which I did used to do.
Okay. So just in case you need to, you can threaten people with that. But
exactly. Exactly. What was Hellraiser, that movie where the guy has all the said. So functional medicine, which is what I practice now, is the science of understanding what is happening in the human body in order to find the root cause of whatever issue you're facing. So whether it's a headache or diabetes or wanting to lose weight or cancer or an autoimmune disease, functional medicine is literally the science of using all the modern tools we have to understanding what is actually happening. And the difference between that and going to an MD, not all MDs, but in a traditional sense of an MD, what they're trained to do is they're trained to decrease symptoms. So you have high blood pressure, they're going to give you a high blood pressure medication. You're dealing with anxiety or depression, they're going to give you an anti-anxiety or medication for depression. Now, the question is, and this is what functional medicine seeks to answer, what's causing the depression? What's causing the high blood pressure? Is it an environmental toxicity issue? Is it a stress issue? Is it a dietary issue? And that's what we're looking for. And so we use all the tests that we can, from sequencing DNA to blood tests to microbiome testing to urinary metabolites, every tool we possibly have to build a 365-degree picture of what's happening with you. Does that make sense?
That does. So looking at things from a holistic picture, not just like treating the symptoms or putting a Band-Aid on something, but really getting to the root of why is this happening to you.
Exactly. Because,
Oh, sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you there. I'll let you keep going.
No.
Oh, okay.
I didn't say
So
anymore.
something whenever I bring up functional medicine and people have questions about it, the question comes up is like, is this in lieu of traditional going to a hospital and seeing a doctor, or is it in addition to? So I don't know what your recommendation is. Is this something people should do preventatively, or only if they have something you're trying to resolve and they haven't, a regular hospital hasn't been able to help you, or what would you
Yeah,
recommend?
I mean, I think to me, it's both and.
Okay.
Uh, every branch of medicine, whether it's standard Western medicine, whether it's functional medicine, Chinese medicine, Ayurveda, energy work, it's kind of like understanding that there's lots of different kinds of food in the world. If you just go to your doctor and your doctor gives you information and you only act on that, it's kind of like going to McDonald's and thinking that's the only place, that's the only type of hamburger there is in the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
And thinking that that's the only kind of food there is in the world. There's a whole universe of healing modalities. And so I think it, one, depends on what it is that you're dealing with. Western medicine is fantastic at dealing with acute and or life-threatening issues, works really well for that.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't work so well for chronic disease. That's been very well established because chronic disease is lifestyle and environment based. And in that case, in the case of autoimmunity or other types of chronic issues, body pain, inflammation, insomnia, things like that, there's not a lot of great tools in Western medicine. And in that case, doing the functional approach makes a lot more sense. That said, there's also a handful of people who like to use this stuff like biohackers just because
Mm-hmm.
they want, like all us weird biohacker people, we just want to know what's happening. We're like, yeah, man, yeah, take my blood. Let me
Exactly.
pee in a bottle. Oh yeah, right. We just
Just
want
want to
to
see what
we
those
just want
numbers
to
look
know.
like. Yeah,
Exactly. And then we want to change them.
exactly. Um, no, I think that's a great point when it comes to something like if you need surgery, right? If you have a broken leg, like it's not necessarily a good idea to, oh, let's go sit down, let's talk about your relationships, and if you're too stressed at work, maybe that's why your leg broke. It's like, no, you should go to a
Right.
doctor, like a hospital, get your legs fixed. But if it's something where it's like I have had some kind of a gut issue for a long time, it's like, and the doctor just gave me these pills, like, is that what's really going to treat it? Like, maybe you should take a look at this and at least see what somebody else has to say around it. To that point, something I was kind of curious about. So functional medicine treating things that kind of have like their foot in somebody needing to change their lifestyle or habits or their environment. I mean, you'd be kidding yourself if you said these are easy things to change for most people. Like it's like, oh, you are having trouble losing weight or your cholesterol's high because you're stressed all the time. I mean, that's a very difficult thing to solve. So I don't know, how do you usually go about helping somebody implement real change when it comes to their environment, their lifestyle, their habits, things like that?
Yeah. That's a great question because we all know how difficult it is when we say, oh, I want to do that, how difficult it is to actually change our behavior. And what I've found is that our behavior is very much wrapped up in our identity of who we think we are. Identity and environment makes a huge difference. And so when we're looking at behavior change, the first thing that I tell people is that, hey, this is going to be difficult. And there is a point, I guarantee you, where you're going to want to quit. And I'm just going to tell you that up front because when that point comes along, call me and say, Jonah, this is the point that you told me about that I want to quit. And then we can address that. And that happens no matter who we are, because that quitting point is the point where we actually have to change the identity of who we think we are, right? Of being somebody who like always fails to like having some internal self-talk of, oh, I treat my body well. And so what I do is I use a technique called motivational interviewing. You may have heard of it. It's a psychological technique that seeks to reinforce people's strengths but also tell the truth of where they are. And that's really the most important, is we all have to understand what our real motivation is. So many times, say somebody, take something simple. Someone wants to lose weight. I could say, Bob, how important is it to you to lose weight on a scale of 1 to 10? It's a 9. Why is it a 9? Well, because, I want to be there for my kids. I want to be there for my wife, et cetera, et cetera. All right. What's your confidence level that you can do that? And depending on where someone's confidence level is, that will determine how much support they need. So if their confidence level is a 4, that means they need a lot of support. If their confidence level is a 9, they probably don't need as much support. Now, the real issue where the rubber meets the road is when someone says their confidence is a 9, but they keep failing, then they're not telling the truth.
Just so that number becomes less reliable.
That's
you kind
right.
of assume that most people are a little bit overconfident, or how accurate are most people in their self-assessments?
People are generally pretty accurate on their self-assessment, surprisingly. Yeah. And in fact, one of the best metrics to find out how healthy people are is you say, on a scale of 1 to 10, how healthy would your significant other say you were? You don't ask them.
So if you phrase the question like that, then they're forced to be like, oh, actually act as an observer and be a little bit less biased than if they're standing in their shoes.
That's right. And it turns out that one metric is an incredibly accurate way of determining how healthy somebody is.
Really? Okay. That's interesting. Because
it's data validated.
Oh, okay. That's cool. Yeah. You hear studies that most people think that they're an above average driver. When it comes to exactly. So it's so I don't know. It's always comes into question about how accurate people are. You got to assume that you're being pretty biased no matter what. But I do like the idea of switching the question and the phrasing, the wording specifically to kind of force somebody to act as an observer, even if especially if they don't have that. I found that I think the actual skill of making a change in your life is something that's not necessarily taught, or it's not always that obvious, where it's like, I do things one way and it feels a certain way when I do something, and I need to do it in a different way. And understanding oh, when I do that thing, I'm going to do this, or I'm going to want to do this thing, but I now have to do it differently. That skill set in and of itself is extremely valuable, especially when it comes to if you want to get into biohacking, you want to make these more lifestyle changes. Just being able to sense that oh, things are going to feel different, but that's a good thing. That's exactly what I'm going for. So I don't know if that's
how do you coach people through lifestyle and behavior change?
If I am helping somebody start a new diet, right? Even if it's the basics of you're no longer going to eat things like bread and dairy and I don't know, other hidden forms of glucose for a while, whatever set period of time they want to do it in. Your brain is you're going to have this craving for this thing, right? And it's going to feel like the world is falling apart around you. You're going to be tested, right? And I think the most important thing too is that in the moment when you want to make that change, you're going to be oh, this is great. I'm not going to eat that cupcake, or when my coworker throws a pizza party, I'm not going to eat any pizza, right? You feel motivated in that moment, right? But that motivation has a clock on it, and it is going to go away. And that's when you're going to be tested, is when that motivation goes away and then you're tempted, right? That's the actual test. are you really going to make that change, or you're not going to make that change? And in that moment, maybe I'm a little bit stricter than some people. I say not a single bite. You need to make sure that you are 100% committed, at least for a period of time, to being this is different now. Because I think one bite leads to more and more and more. And I just think it's too slippery of a slope, especially if you have a track record of not sticking to diets, not sticking to new healthy habits, things like that. It's then maybe you do need to be a little bit stricter with yourself. So it's kind of this motivation is great. Set up the rules so that all you have to do is follow the rules that you've predetermined when you were in that good mental state. And then when you are tested, be more likely to have a better outcome, aka pass on donuts, pizza, whatever it is. So I think something that's always worked for me, and I am a little bit more binary than some other people. I'm very what's the rule I'm following? Either I'm on diet or off diet. I don't really have much of a middle ground. But it has worked for other people, as far as even people that are more moderate than I am. They can have, a bite of ice cream or something like that without finishing the whole pint, right? I don't have that ability in me for whatever reason.
Me neither.
It's like, I don't know what it is. But even for people that are like that, up front, the first few months of this habit changing, being more strict does pay dividends in the end. When you go back to being moderate about things, you're even more moderate than you would have been before. You really have this power that you've gained over yourself. So I kind of harp on that a little bit at the beginning. And sometimes people need a little extra push, but people that really want to make a change.
I would agree with you on that. I think that making those decisions ahead of time, so that you don't have to make that decision in the moment. Making the decision in the moment is where failure occurs. So it's like, oh, I said I would try to really not eat sugar. Failure. Guaranteed.
Exactly. That's not going to hold up when you're really tested. Not a chance. Yeah. That's why I've always been, it's my favorite is the slow carb diet, just because it does the Tim Ferriss one. So if people aren't familiar with that, essentially it's a version of paleo diet that I would suggest, or that I would say, with one cheat day, which just works for me as the psychological release valve to eat whatever I want. Now, this wouldn't work for everybody. Totally depends on what your health goals are. Everybody needs to find their own version of this, but it has made it so easy to say no 6 days out of the week and still meet whatever fitness or health goal that I have.
Yeah. You got to find what works for you, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Which is why somebody like you would come in and you could help people actually figure out and dial in exactly what they need. So moving into something a little bit more tactical, and this is something that you and I have spent some time talking about before, which is stress. So especially here in the Bay Area, but I don't think there's anywhere in the world that's immune to this. Stress seems like a pretty common thing for most people, either high pressure jobs or family stress or whatever else, in life is causing it. But I think people have some misconceptions of it. Not all stress is bad stress. So maybe I'll let you take it from there and maybe explain to people a little bit more about the role that it plays, why it's important, what's bad about it.
Great. Well, stress, first of all, is just a signal. And it's a signal to our bodies and our minds to pay attention. So if we think of it from an evolutionary perspective, we're walking down the trail, a saber-toothed tiger jumps out in front of us, and we freeze. And the reason why we have a freeze response is because large cats can only see contrast. They don't actually see color. So when a human would freeze, the cat can't see you. And so we had adapted because cats were the primary predators for humans. And what would happen? If the cat saw you, you would either have to fight or flee. So freeze is the first thing. And people blame themselves for freezing in crazy situations, but that's totally natural. And then the second thing is to either flee or fight. And that's what stress is there to do. It's there to help you pay attention, to release a bunch of blood sugar so that you can freeze, fight, or run. Now, like you said, there's a very large spectrum of what stress is. Acute stress is actually good for us. So the acute stress of exercise makes our bodies stronger. The acute stress of going through a dietary exercise and really dealing with your diet makes you stronger in the long term. Getting into a cold plunge has all sorts of physiological benefits. Now, where stress goes wrong is when it's chronic. When you get into a point where it's and I think we all know this, especially West Coast San Francisco, waking up and dreading going to work, or dreading the projects you have, or dreading all that stuff. It's it can start to wear on you. The traffic, and if you have a family, the kids and the in-laws and all that stuff, it can feel like it's too much. And what happens at that point is, when we're feeling that stress all the time, the first thing that happens is our stress hormones go up. And those stress hormones go up to tell us to pay attention. But if we don't get rid of that acute stress, those stress hormones will start to go down. And that's even worse, because when your stress hormones are up, you're stressed, but you have the internal physiological resources to deal with it. But when those stress hormones go down, that's where you're like, man, I do not want to go to work, and I don't know how I'm going to face going to work. And when we think of stress from a spectrum, acute and chronic, and acute stress is almost always good for us, no matter what. It almost is always good for us. It's when that acute stress turns into chronic stress where we get in trouble.
Interesting.
And sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. So just kind of tying it back to the metaphor or the evolutionary basis where this comes from. Okay, so I see a cat. It scares me. I think I have to freeze, so stress goes up. In evolutionary context, is there a benefit? Is there a reason why stress would go down, or is it just a byproduct of our extended stress responses in the modern world?
Why stress would then return to normal, you're saying? Or why the stress hormones go down?
So it's bad for me. It's bad for my health if my stress hormones go down. Now that's when I feel bad.
Yes.
In an evolutionary context, is there a reason that would happen? Is there still a benefit to that? Or?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, because so what happens when your stress hormones go up, the first thing that happens is it releases a ton of blood sugar into the system. And it raises your epinephrine and your norepinephrine so that you're like totally resourced. It turns off your immune system immediately, so you don't have to worry about that. And cortisol, which is the stress hormone, will actually use your muscles as fuel if it needs to. If you run out of blood sugar, it'll start eating your own tissue in order to fuel yourself. Because if maybe you're living in a cave and something happens and you need to move 25 miles quickly and you haven't eaten for 3 days, those stress hormones are going to get you to where you need to go. Now, the reason why, from an evolutionary standpoint, the stress hormones will start to fall is, imagine if you're under stress for a long period of time, what's going to happen is your blood sugar is going to stay high and your body is going to go into what's called a catabolic state, because cortisol, the stress hormone, is catabolic, and catabolism is the opposite of anabolic. So anabolic steroids are used for building tissue. Catabolism is basically eating tissue, using tissue to fuel your body. And so if your stress hormones were to stay high, your body would literally eat itself. And so what the brain does is the brain goes, oh, wow, stress is really high, but we don't want the body to eat itself. So we're going to turn down the meter on the stress hormones and drop them down. And that's why people, report like kind of the tired and wired thing. That's when their stress hormones are actually low. And that's much worse than having them high.
Gotcha. Okay. That makes more sense. I appreciate you explaining that, because I know that's like a very complicated thing that you could have said it in a much more, a much fancier way, but I appreciate you.
Yeah, I try not to, because I'm trying to understand this stuff too. Simple a standpoint as I possibly can.
Yeah. Okay. So bringing this into something that's a little bit more tactical for people. So, we have done some stress testing on me. At least I know I spit into some tubes and then I sent it somewhere that you told me. I don't know if you're just collecting that because you enjoy doing that. Is the test that you would recommend it for me one that you would recommend to most people? Is it something you would recommend to people who are feeling stressed? Like what are some signals or some red flags somebody might use as an indicator that this might be something that's right for them?
Yeah, I mean, you're like a young, healthy, very health conscious person. You do live in the city, so that is that there is stress created from that. But basically the test that I gave you is it's called a diurnal cortisol test. It's very simple. It's been around for 25 or 30 years. And basically what we're doing is we're measuring your circadian rhythm. So we're measuring your internal body clock and what your hormones are doing in relation to that body clock. Mm-hmm. And then we're also measuring your sex hormone precursors, DHEA. And DHEA is the precursor to testosterone and estrogen. So basically what we're doing is we're using that as a proxy to see how stressed you are. And essentially what we're saying is like, is your cortisol high? Are you kind of in an acute stress mode? Or is your cortisol low? Are you in a chronic stress mode? As it turned out for you, you were fine. Your cortisol was a little low, but I remember and if you don't mind me, you mind me sharing this?
I do not. No, I think that for the benefit of the group, I will be the guinea pig for everybody. Great.
Your DHEA, which is a sex hormone precursor, was like perfect. And so what that means is that even though your cortisol was a little bit lower than we'd like to see, mm-hmm. And the reason why I do it in quotes is because we're all individuals. There is a great amount of individual variability. DHEA is really the telltale sign. If your cortisol was low and your DHEA was low, I would know that you were in a chronic stressed state, because what happens is then your DHEA, instead of creating sex hormones, basically it goes cholesterol, pregnenolone, DHEA. And so if you were under stress, what would happen is that cholesterol would turn into pregnenolone, and that pregnenolone would go over here and become cortisol. And it would no longer go down the DHEA pipe.
Okay.
And so because your DHEA was like solid, that means that pregnenolone is not getting overly shunted over to become cortisol. So that means you have a healthy cortisol response.
Okay, gotcha. So you would suggest for people who live in cities or stressful environments that looking at your DHEA and your cortisol levels is something that's worth looking into, just to make sure you're avoiding long-term detrimental effects of exhausting your stress system a little bit too much.
Yeah, it's a good test. It's not expensive. It's a couple $100 and you can go and get it done. What people do make the mistake of is oftentimes they'll go to their doctor and then they'll ask for a cortisol test. The problem with that is that they're taking it from your serum, from your blood, and they're just measuring the amount of cortisol you have at one point during the day.
Just at that one point, like randomly in the middle of the day? Like,
it doesn't tell us anything. It doesn't really tell us anything. It would tell us if you had a pituitary tumor or something like that.
Okay.
But it's not gonna give us your circadian rhythm, which is why you spit into the tube 4 times.
Gotcha. And just some context for people, just to make sure nobody's left behind. So the way that, from when I did it, it was, so it's measuring it through your saliva. So you spit in a tube. You do that in the morning. There's very strict rules around, how much you drink, how much you eat. And if anybody, I'm sure several people in this group have done weird tests like this. There's all kinds of little stipulations. However, it gets a reading in the morning, middle of the day, evening, and before bed, right? So you have a graph, essentially, that gets made, this curve where it should peak in the morning. Maybe it's backwards for the camera. I'll do it over here. Peak in the morning and then slowly get down, bottoming out in the evening. So to get that whole picture, if you just took a blood sample in the middle of the day, you'd have a number, you'd have a dot. You wouldn't have a line. You would have no graph or curve, or you wouldn't have the picture that you need, really. If I'm explaining that right. I don't know if I left anything.
That's perfect.
Okay.
That's absolutely perfect. Yep.
Okay. So, well, I'm very happy that my numbers work out well. It's a load off. So let's say it didn't go well though. What do you recommend for people that are stressed out? I mean, I have lots of friends who are either starting companies or working in other high stress jobs. And they're waking up with stomach aches in the middle of the night. Some people are losing their hair. They are panic attacks is, I mean, it's almost weird if you haven't had a panic attack at this point in this city and in a lot of people. And not that this is a good thing or at all. But I mean, what do you suggest to those people? I mean, is there any hope for them? Or if they walked into your office and said, I can't sleep, I'm feeling horrible, what should I do?
Yeah. Well, there is hope.
Okay.
And the reason there is hope is because, there's this idea, especially in the startup world, that it's like, we've got to go, 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 go. We can't take 1 minute off. We just have to constantly be on. And, fortunately or unfortunately, what happens is even when we're on, we're actually performing at a level of about a 2 out of a 10. And what I've found over the years is that if we can get someone to have 5 really, really productive hours versus 12 mediocre hours, you're going to get a lot more done. So that's the first thing, is just to understand how to frame it. It's like, you actually don't have to be on all the time. Now, if someone is dealing with symptoms of physiological stress, like stomach aches or headaches or hair loss or insomnia or panic attacks, that is a sign. Again, they're having stress. Stress is here to make us pay attention. That's a sign that we've gone over the edge and we need to pull back. And so at that point, someone needs to start prioritizing recovery. And, I've had people say, I don't have time. I don't have time. And at that point, that's a question of like, okay, you don't have time. And I hear you saying that, but what's important to you? Are you willing to sacrifice your health? If you are, awesome. Here's what we can do to support you and try to keep your health going as much as possible without using medications. Or do you want to prioritize your health and still perform your duty as a startup CEO or what have you? And I've had people, there's certain people who are like, I don't care. I'm willing to sacrifice everything for this. Just support me as much as I can. And that support would look like giving people those hormone precursors, pregnenolone and DHEA. It would look like supporting their brain with amino acids, precursors to dopamine, serotonin, epinephrine, and norepinephrine. It could look like all sorts of stuff. But when someone wants to prioritize their health, it's much easier, as you know, because then you're willing to measure things. And I don't know if it was some famous business guy said, what gets measured gets managed.
Oh yeah, Peter Drucker.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. No, I think that's it's absolutely true. And I really like that you start by reframing it from like focusing on your health and taking a little bit of energy and putting it into that bucket does not mean that you're necessarily going to be less productive or that your dreams or vision are going to fall apart immediately. I think in a lot of regards, like if you are starting to start a company or do something that you plan on doing for anything more than, we'll call it like a year, a short amount of time, like having some kind of plan for you physically sustaining this process is probably smarter. And at some point, you're probably going to have to do it anyway. And it's not like you're going to have less work if things are more successful. If anything, you're probably going to have more work, so you might as well do it now.
Yeah. When I built my company, I was working 80 hours a week. And, I was young, going for it, doing the thing. I sold my company and I like went traveling and surfed and all that. But besides that, I was like literally lying on my couch. Like I had no motivation, anything. And I had no idea that I was burned out. And it wasn't until years later when I developed this horrible, intractable insomnia that it caught up with me. So it took years to catch up with me. If I would have known then and been able to take a cortisol test, I would have been able to see how over the edge I already was.
Really? Okay. Then you could have compared. That would have been interesting to look at, to see where you were, you were after you sold the company and we're done with it.
Yeah.
taking a step back from stress. So specifically, I know that's only like a very small part of the things that you help people with. So um, I don't want to keep you here all night and eat up your entire evening. But I guess, do you have some more health tips, or like what is kind of your 80-20 on living, we'll call it a healthy life, right? Now, I mean, of course, to everybody, that's a little bit different. So hopefully people can be kind of okay with us using that term broadly, but
Yeah, I mean, I kind of go back to the grandma rule on this. It's like the things that your grandma would tell you to do is the 80-20, right? It's like, make sure you get enough sleep and you get outside, all that kind of stuff. But it's true. The data shows that how we feel about our intimate relationships at 50, say that the average 50-year-old, their longevity is more determinant by how they feel about their intimate relationships than any other thing, whether they're a smoker, what their diet is, exercise, anything like that. And Dan Buettner in his Blue Zone research has looked at, the 5 blue zones around the world where there's
and
a
just
high
and
number
just for
of
people. Oh, sorry,
areas.
you're going to explain it. I just wanted to make sure. Yeah, please continue.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, the blue zones are areas around the world where there are, and correct me if I don't say this correctly, where there's a high number of people who are living who are over 100 years old.
Mhm.
That is that
Yeah, correct.
basically?
The high percentage of centenarians, which are people that have lived over 100
Yeah, and what he's found is that the sense of community is probably the most important thing. And so the number one thing is relationships and belonging. I mean, a lot of people in San Francisco feel like they're kind of alienated and not part of a community and all of that stuff. And so any effort that we can put into really vitalizing our intimate relationships and cultivating those intimate relationships is time really well served. And here's what's interesting, and this goes back to stress. What one of the first things that I learned from Dr. Kalish was, he said to me, he said, when someone's relationships are really dialed in, it's almost like they're immune to a certain amount of stress. Their cortisol responses are actually better than someone who's dealing with relationship upheaval. And I learned that from him, and it's proven to be true based on all the results that I've seen.
Really. So one of the most making sure that your intimate relationships and the people that you're spending the most time with, that those are in order. Because I guess the detrimental effect of that is hard to cure with any amount of biohacking or supplementation or anything like that.
Right. Biohacking our relationships, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
the
um,
case for couples therapy.
biohacking couples, I can't wait for that one
Yeah.
to become
Yeah.
popular. No, I think that's a phenomenal point. Usually when people ask kind of like, what is biohacking? What's the point of biohacking and doing all these tests and buying all these fun gadgets and things like that? While the data is interesting and there's lots of fantastic things you can accomplish, when it really comes down to like being an overall healthy person, I mean, if you don't have your diet in order, your nutrition in order, your sleep habits, optimize your personal relationships, your regular physical, like, are you exercising? Are you getting outside? Like, no amount of photobiomodulation or transcranial direct current stimulation, any of those things, they're not going to do anything if you don't have those in order.
Nope.
Like it
That's
doesn't,
right.
it's like you have to have
Yeah.
that basis of what really matters.
General health principles are more important than specific interventions every single time. Yeah, so relationships, the other things I would say would be clean water, get a water filter. You don't want to be drinking chlorine, because what does chlorine do? It kills bacteria. You don't want to be drinking chlorine that is killing your gut bacteria.
Is there a lot of chlorine in our tap water? I am admittedly pretty ignorant on this topic. So
There's chlorine and chloramine, which are the 2 disinfectants that are used in tap water. And there's a lot of questionable data on the fluoride that they're putting in as well. So, for a couple $100, you can go and buy a good water filter. You can go buy there's a Berkey makes a good water filter. It's a
How do you
countertop.
spell that one?
Berkey.
Okay. And we can link to this stuff too. I'll send out notes with this interview, and just to make sure people can find the right one. And one question on that, this is actually something I've been wondering for a long time, so I'm happy to hopefully have an answer to it. When it comes to drinking purified water, how important is it? Is it something where it's like, do it 100% of the time, or you're doing it 50% of the time is still good enough? Like if I have the water that I drink at home and at work, I use the right purifier for, that's most of the water that I'm drinking. But if I go to the gym and I use their water fountain, I mean, is that bad, or is it worth investing in, like, finding a way to get filtered water 24/7?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question, and it depends on what your health goals are and what you're dealing with. If you're dealing with gut dysbiosis, like a gut problem, then drinking chlorinated water would be a no-no.
Ever, okay.
99% of the time. Do I drink the water when I go to the gym? I do, because drinking water for me is drinking water is important. I would like to drink pure water all the time, but yeah, if you're, drinking clean water 50% of the time is better than drinking chlorinated water 100% of the time.
Gotcha.
So absolutely. I mean, with any of this stuff, as harm reduction is always good.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. I guess, yeah, with recommendations like this, I always hate it when it's like you have to do it this one way, and then it becomes too cumbersome and people are just like, oh, I'm fine, I'm not going to do it. So it is worth it to just have at your house, just fix the problem at your house and maybe also at work. And that's still worth the time and effort and energy.
Oh my God. Okay. Oh yeah. Because the amount of water you drink at home, is 10x what you drink everywhere else. So a Berkey water filter. The other option is reverse osmosis filters, and those are a couple $100 on Amazon. The disadvantage with reverse osmosis is it does produce a lot of wastewater.
Okay.
I generally don't recommend that people drink bottled water unless it's in glass, and that's because plastic does leach into that water, and we've run enough tests on people that we can see those plastic compounds. They're in your blood, they're in my blood, not just from water, but just from the sheer amount of plastic in the environment. It
does seem like that is coming up more often, and the results are not favorable when it comes to the amount of plastic that they're finding inside of people. And I'm assuming it's something similar. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I'm assuming it's something similar to where, like, if you drink one bottle of water every now and then, okay. But if that's your main source, if you don't drink tap water and you just buy bottled water at Walmart and you're just drinking bottles of water all day, you're not doing yourself any favors. You just kind of switched out one problem maybe for a different problem now.
Yeah, it's like if you've been to Central America, where it's like you're drinking bottled water out of plastic all the time, that's not ideal.
It's not ideal either. Okay. Ideal. So filtered water out of a glass container is the most sustainable solution. So moving on. So working with patients in like a functional medicine specialist role is one thing you do. So you also work for, or how did you get involved in how humans work? And can you tell us a little bit more about what that is?
Yes. How humans work grew out of a need that I saw in working with clients and really helping people to understand what I call their own operating system. I was just saying the same thing to patient after patient after patient after patient, saying, look, stress is a signal. It's not something you're supposed to try to get rid of. You need to take it in and understand what it is and then act from there. And my partner in that company, Jeffrey Szilagyi, he and I started talking about what it is that we thought people needed to know. And so we started working with different companies. He had done some work with Cliff Bar, and then we started to work with Wells Fargo, and we were looking for an assessment tool to try and find out how people were doing. And we couldn't find one that was holistic. We found health risk assessments and all that. And so we actually developed an assessment tool called Vitality GPS. And if people actually want to go and experience it for themselves, they're absolutely welcome to. There's a bit.ly link. It's just bit.ly, bit.ly/Vitality GPS. And one word of warning, it does take about 20 minutes to get through, but okay. you'll get your results, and it's pretty fun. So what we did is we started training companies and employees in companies how to work with their health in a way that wasn't like, you need to be healthy. We call it vitality because everybody wants to be vital. Everyone wants to feel good. But like trying to be healthy for many, many people is a big stress. For you and I, we're like into it. But for a lot of people, they like want to run the other way.
Yeah, it's not always a fun topic, or people haven't always had good experiences with it. So.
Yeah, especially if you're dealing with health problems. And so, you know, what I tell people is like, you know, when someone brings the box of donuts into the office and you really want to eat that donut, you're actually supposed to want to eat the donut. Your entire evolutionary biology and physiology is oriented towards getting quick, easy calories as quickly as possible. And so you may choose not to eat the donut, but you should never blame yourself for wanting to eat the donut.
Just means everything's working the way that it should if your body is wanting to get you as fat as possible so you don't starve to death in the winter.
Exactly. Exactly. So that's what we do. We do corporate, basically. We're not really health. It's kind of in the Venn diagram between leadership and development and health and wellness. It's where those two things come together.
Really?
That's
okay.
where our work is.
So usually like corporations will hire you, and is this more of like a management training thing? Is this like a team a training or education type
course?
We
usually do it with teams. We usually do it with teams. We'll go in there, we'll run Vitality GPS on the entire team. We'll find out where that low-hanging fruit is. In the corporate world, it's a lot of people are kind of are what they're missing is the downtime and the restore time. You know, it's this idea, go all the time. Many people are missing the restore aspect. And so whatever it is, like we score it across what we call the 6 human needs. So we have move, nourish, and restore. These are the external kind of traditional needs like exercise, movement, exercise, food, and sleep. But for us, we're measuring a whole bunch of other things in there. Restore is also play, restore is downtime. Nourishment is not just the food we eat, it's the water we drink, it's the sunlight we get, it's the air we breathe. And then we have the psychosocial needs, which are creativity, belonging, and purpose. And so we're measuring all of those. And so we can see inside a team where they're doing really well and where they're not doing so well. And then we team up different individuals with each other to create accountability teams. And then we give them a challenge usually. And the beautiful thing about it is that if you raise one area, it's almost like keystone habits. You start to get better in your sleep, or you start to get better in your purpose, or whatever it is. Rising tide raises all boats, and we see those scores increase over time.
And as far as the follow-up to make sure that hopefully these new tenants are sticking, so the pairing them up strategically provides a layer of accountability. Is there any like other follow-up that you and your partner do? Kind of what's the longer view of the changes that you make? What does that look like?
Yeah, well, we will run the assessment tool on them again. So what we'll do is we'll we'll run the assessment tool, and then we like to correlate it with their KPIs or OKRs, their key performance indicators, objectives and key results. And, we found there's absolutely a correlation between their KPIs, OKRs, and their vitality scores, because people who are happy do better. It's pretty simple, really.
And for non-startup world people, KPIs and OKRs just mean like essentially the annual goals or the metrics that the company is using to gauge their success or whatever they're trying to accomplish to kind of steer the ship. So I think that's really smart to align success when it comes to KPIs and OKRs with this vitality score, how, well or healthy, quote unquote, the team members are.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's a smart business.
Yeah.
So to wrap up here, I just kind of had a few different rapid fire questions that I think
let's do it
would be interesting. So questions are rapid, but feel free to take as long to respond as you would like to.
I'll try to give rapid fire responses.
Okay. So I guess, what is the health related book that you recommend most to your patients that you see?
That's a good question. I think it really depends on what they're going through. If it's any sort of, for longevity, I think Jason Fung's book, what's it called? It's called The Complete Guide to Fasting by Dr. Jason Fung. Is a phenomenal book. Another good one is Grain Brain by David Perlmutter. That's kind of a classic one, just explaining the inflammatory aspects of gluten and carbs and sugar. Mindset
Grain Brain. Okay.
Grain Brain. Yeah, David Perlmutter. From a mindset perspective, Joe Dispenza has a book called You Are the Placebo. And one of the things that I do in my work with clients is you have to really adopt what I call a healing mindset. And a healing mindset is basically like using the power of our minds to heal our bodies. There's the placebo effect, and study after study after study has shown that when we think in a certain way, that our physiology responds to that. And so, Joe Dispenza's books are amazing. You Are the Placebo is just one of them, but he has How to Be Superhuman, or he's got a bunch of books, interesting stuff. And then as far as movement goes, Katie Bowman, she's got a podcast, but she's a physiologist, and she's got a book called Move Your DNA. And she's just talking about how to be moving throughout the day. She's not hung up on like, oh, you got to go to the gym and do CrossFit and do XYZ. She's like, how do you pick up your kid? How do you squat down and take the pans out of the cupboard? And she's just phenomenal. Really a brilliant mind.
That's interesting. That's awesome book recommendations. I think it's funny that you brought up Joe Dispenza. I have a friend that I really hold in high regards whenever it comes to mindfulness, or not to freak anybody out by using the word spirituality, but spirituality. And he actually recommended that. So it was quite a coincidence. And as far as movements, like how you do simple activities, something I kind of came up recently I thought about is Peter Attia did a podcast recently, and he was kind of just talking about, I believe he's doing something called the Longevity Olympics, where he's kind of, everybody has like a set of goals for things to do at a certain age. And I think it's at 70. One of his was to be able to get up and sit down on the ground and stand up on his own with no assistance. And it doesn't sound that intimidating, but then I thought about it. I was like, how many like 70-year-olds or even 60-year-olds do I know that like can sit down comfortably on the ground, then stand up? It's like not that many. So like maybe these actual like smaller movements that you take for granted that seem to disappear at some point, but nobody really knows. It's without your consent, really, they just kind of go away. what can I do today to make sure that they're still here?
Absolutely. I mean, just sitting on the floor, not using your hands to pull you up and trying to stand up is a great measure of how mobile you are.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah,
yeah.
Which seems like oh, you should definitely be able to do that, but as soon as you can't, it's kind of like, wait, what went wrong? When did that?
Yeah.
That's a big one.
Yeah. Squatting is a big thing. Most modern humans, Western humans, can't squat. And that means like sit with your both feet heels on the ground and put your butt down like a squat for a minute. Most people can't do that because we're sitting in chairs all the time, and our hips are so tight that we're actually not able to get into that position. And that's a very natural position. And that's one of the reasons why people, when they're older, they're always breaking their hips, is because when they fall like a tree instead of collapsing into a squat.
Makes sense.
Whereas, if you go to Asia, you'll see people squatting all over the place all the time.
Which is a very like normal movement that I'm sure we did quite frequently before we were sitting in chairs the majority of the day.
Yeah, you watch a kid, they squat. Watch, a 3-year-old, they're squatting all the time.
Yeah, it is pretty impressive. Okay, I'm pretty bad at rapid fire questions, so let's get.
All right, next.
Okay, so what is the book, non-health related, or can also be health, that you most recommend to people in general, or people recommend?
Man, I read *Sapiens* and *Homo Deus*. Yuval Noah Harari.
Mm-hmm.
Have you heard of those books?
I have, yes. *Sapiens* was quite eye-opening. I think
you read it.
I did, yeah. It lives up to the expectation of how much credit everybody gives.
Yeah. What was your big takeaway from that?
All the different species of humans that existed. I guess like the shorter pygmy people of I'm forgetting it. I read it a little while ago. But I was like, wait a second, I'm just one of those versions that like made it. But there was like tons of other ones that could have easily made it and outwitted whatever tribe I descend from. And life would look a lot different. So I just kind of playing around with all the different ideas of what kind of configuration the world could look like today, but we're in this one.
Yeah. That book totally lived up to the hype. And then I think I really appreciated his follow-up book, *Homo Deus*. So for those people in the audience, *Sapiens* is a brief history of humankind, and it's an amazing, entertaining book. *Homo Deus* is the future, and what Harari sees as sort of coming down the pike. And I just thought it was absolutely eye-opening and mind-blowing, and almost like it's something that all of us really need to read, because that is what's happening, whether we're doing it consciously or unconsciously. That is what's happening. And so, my goal in myself and working with clients is that things become as conscious as possible. So I think he's a brilliant mind, and really lovely book.
I would definitely agree. I think it was very entertaining, but also contained just as much information as multiple textbooks could, but conveyed in a way that really stuck.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, next question. What is something you wish people knew before taking advice or recommendation from a, I'm going to say the word traditional doctor. For context, I am thinking of I'm sick, I don't feel well, I go to a normal doctor, they give me pills. Something we've all done. What is a piece of the puzzle that might be missing, and this is something we've talked about, throughout this conversation.
No, great. I mean, number one, ask a ton of questions. And if you don't understand something, it's your right to understand it. I use a lot of big words a lot of times when I'm explaining physiology and amino acids and fatty acids and, urinary metabolites and all this stuff. And I mean, that goes right over people's heads. And so it's really, really important. The first thing is you need to I wish people would really take it to understand why they're taking the pill that their doctor is giving them. Like, not just like, oh, I'm just going to take it because my doctor said so. Like, why? Like, actually, why? That is the most important thing. And we don't give ourselves enough credit because we've been taught, oh, we need to respect this person. We need to respect that person. We're not supposed to talk back. There's a person of authority. But we really need to understand why it's super important.
Mm-hmm. And definitely not to say that traditional or regular, doctors are dumb or bad or have anything out for you. They are just solving the problem the way that they know how to solve it. And maybe it's seeing as health is usually a big picture. You need to look at yourself as a whole picture. You might know you are the one with all the information, right? I mean, the person who's taking the pills is the one who lives this life and experiences it and knows what they put in their mouth and knows what time they go to bed and all these things. The doctor doesn't have all that information. They have like a sheet with some scribbles on it and they look at you for 30 seconds. Like, they don't have time. It's not their fault that they don't have time to learn every little thing about you, but maybe asking questions so you can understand what's actually supposed to happen when you take these pills, at least just an absolute basic level. Then you can apply some more rational thinking, like, oh, maybe these things don't go together. I don't know if you agree with that sentiment or.
Oh, I do. I absolutely do. Absolutely do. And the cool thing is like most doctors these days are like pretty cool. Like they want patients who are interested. I mean, I talk with doctors all the time. I mean, I've got many very close friends who are MDs, and they want interested clients. But in any industry, we start to talk in acronyms and we develop our own language. And so when we then use that language to speak with clients, it's very confusing. And it is your right to know. I think that's just the main thing. It's your right to know why a doctor wants to do something. It's really important.
I think it's good. I think that's wise advice. Last question. Where's your favorite place to surf? I know you're quite the astute surfer and you've traveled the world. So if you can share your secret surf spot.
Oh yeah, sure. I'll share my most secret ones. Well, I live out at Ocean Beach, so I generally surf out here. I would say I was in after I sold my company. I traveled the world. I went down to Chile, and I found a wave in the middle of the Atacama Desert, which is the driest desert in the world, and it was like a dream come true. And if you're a surfer and you want to go there, and you really want to go there, then contact me. And if you're a nice person, I'll give you the GPS coordinates and you can go find it.
Okay, making people work for it.
Yeah, I can't just put it out there because that would be bad. But
exactly.
But
start throwing up, strip malls and hotels there.
So that's probably the coolest place that I've ever really surfed. I grew up in Mendocino County, which is north of here by about 3 hours, and there's a place called Point Arena, which is a little town, and there's a really fun wave there. And if you haven't heard of Point Arena and you decide to go up there because you want to surf, just remember to be respectful, respect the locals, and you'll be fine.
Wise advice. Thank you very much, Jonah.
Always.
For, always. Nothing but wise advice. Well, thank you very much for taking the time tonight to speak. Glad we finally got to sit down and have this chat. Hopefully there'll be a part 2 in the future at some point. Maybe we can make it a live event and have some of the group members come out and meet you. So for anybody listening, if you want to learn more about Jonah, he is on Instagram at Jonah Larkin. That's JONAHLARKIN, no space or period or anything. And his websites are www.warrior.energy and howhumanswork.us. And if you want to find out about more events going on in the Bay Area, health-related events, talks, socials, if you want to connect with other biohackers and become part of the community, please find us at meetup.com/biohackersSF. It's meetup.com/biohackersSF, and you'll find out about the next event. Thanks, Jonah. Until next time.
Thank you, Thomas. Really appreciate it.
All right. See ya.